It's not the top 20, it's the EFL State of the Nation update episode. We are 20% of the way through the season. We're going to talk about how things are shaping up in the Championship, League One and League Two, and also what's unique about those divisions this season. We'll talk through our strongest stances and predictions at this stage, and talk about what's the hardest thing to predict right now. Which teams have caught us by surprise, which teams we massively underestimated, and which we are massively underwhelmed by. And also a weekend review, of course. 2 games in League One and 10 in League Two to tell you about. I'm Ali Maxwell. He's George Elek. Hi.
Hi.
The Championship.
Great league.
Best league in the world. TM. Trademark.
Not by us.
But not the most unpredictable league in the world, which is what it used to be trademarked, but is objectively untrue.
Objectively untrue. This season, I would say, being quite unpredictable.
For sure. But League Two,
so far,
still consistently more
yes.
Unpredictable. George, when the Championship returns on Friday, it does so with a match between the 2 favourites for the title. Leeds, Sheffield United do battle on the box Friday night under the lights. I'm pretty excited about that. Sheffield United are the only unbeaten team left in the EFL. They are not top of the Championship, but they have won the most points this season. Riddle me that. 2-point deduction. Leeds are still seen as the most likely winners by the bookmakers. Their odds currently imply a 40% chance of winning the title. Sheffield United's are the next best with around a 14% chance of winning the title. But they're not the only 2 teams towards the top of the table. In fact, Sunderland sit pretty on top. 1 goal difference goal above Sheffield United on 19 points. Then there's Burnley on 18, West Brom on 17 in 4th. Leeds and Watford fill out the playoff places on 16 points both. And then Norwich and Blackburn have 15 and Middlesbrough are 9th on 14. I'll cap it there for the moment. Talk me through the top of the table as you see it.
I think the top of the table looks... I think the cream is rising towards the top. I'm just not particularly sure it's a very delicious cream this year.
Ooh.
Maybe a bad batch.
Oh.
And that's not to take anything away from, in particular, Sunderland and West Brom, who I think are navigating their way through the early parts of the season very well, albeit with West Brom having suffered a little bit in recent times. What I mean about the cream not being a very good cream of the crop.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fields of cream. This one, not particularly fertile.
Is just that I think if you were to input the 3 promoted sides from last season into this field, they would become the cream of the crop again very quickly, along with one other. So look, that's my perception, is that the top end of the Championship this season isn't as strong or isn't as good as last year. And that provides a massive opportunity to teams like Sunderland and West Brom and Norwich and maybe Watford and Blackburn, but Middlesbrough. These teams who have been in the Championship for a while, who've struggled to compete with teams of parachute payments. Part of the reason for that is that I'm as good as Sheffield United and Burnley have been in terms of pure results this season. I think they would still, if they were both to play against last season's Southampton right now, for example, I think Southampton would be massive favourites, would be the better side against both. Both of them very, very reliant on their really strong defensive numbers, which is good. But I think in particular with one of those sides, they're going to have to be better going forward if they're going to stick around towards the top end of the table. But we'll get into all of that later.
Yeah, still so little between all of these teams. The exact placement in the league table changes after every single game week, so I don't think there's much value in focusing on the exact league positions right now. But I think we can say pretty definitively that the only team currently in the top 9, the only team that I spoke about that is massively overperforming their underlying numbers, which for some people like us is an indicator that that team might not stay up there, is Watford, who we predicted to come 24th in our 1-24. So for professional ego, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for us if they did start to drop down the table. There's been a lot to like about Watford, and much more than we would have laid out in that prediction, but also some wobbliness, some vulnerability defensively, quite high variance games, high variability in their results. They've been pumped a couple of times, and they've also had some big wins. I mean, are there any teams outside of Leeds, who I think we're going to come on to, Sheffield United that we're going to come on to, that you want to just touch on and kind of parse how they've started the season so well? Sunderland, for example, we also didn't necessarily see this coming. West Brom, for example, albeit they're winless in 3, their performance levels have been pretty high.
Yeah, I think with both of those two, I think with Sunderland, now is the time where you have to give immense credit to Régis Lebris and to everyone at the club for their good starts to the season, because because of the club and its history and its fan base, they are now the club where pre-season expectations and feeling to what will happen from now are two completely different things. They are 9 games into the season. They were last seen drawing at home to Leeds United, the title favourites. They have a plethora of very good young attacking players. The departure of Jack Clarke hasn't rocked them at all. If anything, it's probably made them a more cohesive team unit rather than a reliance on shifting the ball out to the left and hoping your star man can do what he does consistently. And rightly or wrongly, I now think they've been from, it's easy to forget that before Régis Lebris' appointment, the Sunderland fans were really concerned. Like, they thought that they were spiralling into basket case territory because they were a club who were seemingly unable to hire a manager who sacked a manager that realistically, in hindsight, they probably shouldn't have sacked when they did.
In Mowbray rather than Beale.
In Mowbray, yeah. And that was a long time ago. So the turnaround of fortunes of Sunderland, a team who looked destined to finish in the top 6 for the most part last season, who dropped away from that so rapidly at the back end of the campaign, who took a long time to make the appointment, for them to have settled so quickly into Lebris' style of play, to have enjoyed a couple of wins. The one that really impressed me was the home win against Sheffield Wednesday, live on Sky in their second game of the season, where they just swatted a team that up to that point had been so impressive under Danny Röhl, where they went ahead early and just completely dominated the game. They've beaten Burnley and Middlesbrough at home too. So it's not a case where they've had a really easy run of games. They have played against decent sides and beaten them. They show a tactical flexibility that I think is important in the Championship, where they're not a team who need a lot of the ball in order to create. They're very good in transition. I've been really impressed with them so far. And the way the season has gone up to now, there's no reason in my mind why they can't be a team who rightly recalculates where they should be this season.
Yeah, Sunderland top scorers in the league at the moment with 18 goals across their 9 games, and it's quite a consistent spread as well. This isn't necessarily the case where it's a team that scored 6 in one game and that's massively boosting their numbers. More on a team like that in just a little while. So I'm pretty impressed with their consistent attacking output, and clearly, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's actually their defensive strength and their ability to see out games when they've been ahead that I've also been really, really impressed with. One thing that's notable and unsurprising about the teams at the top of the league is that as much as they can all score goals, the top 5 at the moment all have really good defensive records and are conceding less than a goal a game. In some cases, significantly less than a goal a game. Sheffield United have conceded 3 goals in their 9 games so far. Burnley only 4. West Brom 6 and Leeds 7. Then there's Borough down in 9th who have conceded 7. Swansea in 11th have only conceded 6 goals but have only scored 8, which is the 3rd lowest number of goals scored in the division. So good defences have generally underpinned strong starts to the season. One thing I noticed is that Leeds have had pretty much the toughest fixture list almost in the whole league so far. They've already played away from home Norwich, Sunderland and West Brom, which you'd imagine will be 3 of their toughest away games that they'll have all season. Whereas a team like Sheffield United, just because of the way the fixtures have fallen, not the toughest fixture list so far. You can only beat what's in front of you, George, and they have done that. But coming up for Sheffield United, Leeds, Borough and Blackburn all away from home in their next 4 league games. So the next couple of weeks, things will continue to shift. Towards the bottom of the table, I'll start in 10th. We've got Oxford, Swansea, Derby and Hull all on 12 points. Plymouth, Sheffield, Bristol City all on 11 points. Stoke on 10. Then Millwall and Preston on 9 each. Coventry and Luton just above the dotted line on 8. QPR on 7. Portsmouth and Cardiff on 5. Again, we are doing a State of the Nation pod where I want to point out the gaps between these teams are very, very small indeed. From Oxford in 12th to QPR in 22nd, just 5 points at the moment.
Yeah, it's always so easy to focus on league position when you're right. It's points tally. Things can change incredibly quickly. But I guess now after 9 games, we're kind of getting to the stage where you can start to pay some attention as to where teams are. It's why it's a good time to do this because, a few weeks ago, you look at a team like Luton and you look at their performances and they picked up a couple of wins. Whereas now, the wins that you pick up in isolation kind of come out in the wash to an extent and we can actually see how teams have started. And yeah, there are definitely a couple of sides down towards the bottom, Luton and Coventry, who I think, we certainly didn't think they were going to be down there. I know that some of their fans, or certainly Luton fans, will say, in hindsight, the writing or the warning signs were already there?
So I think the hardest thing to predict right now in the Championship is the relegation battle. And I know I bang on about this quite a lot, but I think it's worth pointing out. I think one of the reasons for this is that the level of the Championship mid-table and bottom half has risen significantly in the last few years. I think that stems from good decision-making and squad building off the field. Not perfect decision-making and squad building off the field, but better than it used to be, and done in a smarter way and a more thoughtful way, and wasting a lot less money than these clubs used to, but still spending a lot of money and losing a lot of money. But there are, so far, I would say, no embarrassing teams that are getting walked over. Portsmouth and Cardiff have the lowest points tallies. I don't see either of those two teams as embarrassing football teams to have started the season. Portsmouth certainly not. We've talked about their fixture list a lot. We will remain, it remains to be seen to what extent their just confidence has been dented and what impact that will have on their performances overall in the next chunk of games. And when it comes to Cardiff, they started the season all right and were getting bad results. Then their confidence really went and their belief in the manager really went. Now he's gone and they haven't appointed a manager yet. So I'm certainly not willing to relegate Cardiff. And I don't think for much of the games that they've played, I don't think they've been particularly horrendous. So this is exciting. I think it means that the relegation battle will have a lot of drama within it. It means that if the level of these teams is all fairly decent, it's very difficult to pick up a lot of points unless you are one of the very top teams that we've already touched on. Just look at the fact that the team in 10th, one of them being Oxford, or actually the team in 10th is Oxford, has 12 points from 9 games. It's not a particularly high...
Over the course of a season, that doesn't finish you 10th.
No, it's like 660 odd, I think it is. It's not I don't know, what would that be? Should have done the maths before.
Live math.
60 points, that is, which is a good return, but it's not a 10th place return. I think there's basically 15 teams, George, that I would put in a sort of 10th to 18th category based on how I perceive their quality. But 15 teams can't fit into 10 mid-table spots, and that means there's going to be surprise relegations. On this note, what do we see consistently in the Championship? Well, a sacking and a good appointment can save you, right? QPR and Sheffield Wednesday, easy examples from last year. They flew up the table due to really good hires. It is worth remembering that the people that they hired, Röhl and Cifuentes, were quality, and the people that they replaced were overseeing mega underperformance, like pretty shambolic performance for both teams. So there was quite a lot of growth to come. Birmingham found out that a bad appointment can really knock you for 6 and can end up being terminal. Even though Rooney's reign only lasted a couple of months, I think the aftershocks of that continued and was the main contributor, I would say, as to why they went down. Huddersfield tried a couple of different things last season and just kind of kept tripping themselves up, really. So sacking your manager isn't a silver bullet. It doesn't mean that you'll stay up. And that's what makes it really, really interesting. And we've had 3 sackings so far in the Championship. At Cardiff, obviously, who haven't named a replacement yet. There was quite an exciting and random link to Claude Makelele over the weekend.
Slaven Bilic as well.
I would be bang up for. Slaven Bilic talked about as well. Preston sacked Ryan Lowe, replaced him with Paul Heckingbottom. I think it's fair to say that Preston have improved under Paul Heckingbottom, but they are still finding it hard to score a lot of goals and pick up a lot of points. And then there's Stoke City, who I think are a really interesting example of this right now. They sacked their manager since the last international break, which started with Schumacher and then quickly became Narcís Pelak. Their underlying numbers have been terrible. They've had 1 massive win and 3 really poor performances under the new manager. And as discussed, we will find out in the fullness of time whether their appointment made them a better team or whether, for whatever reason, it confused things even more. And as we know, that can lead to some pretty big issues. That, I think, is the hardest thing to predict right now, the relegation battle. I wonder if you've got a strongest stance in the Championship that you'd like to talk me through.
Yeah, my strongest stance this week is also going to be this week's edition of FotMob Corner. Ding, ding.
Ding, ding. Press that button. FotMob Corner button.
And my strongest stance is that Leeds win the league. And I think it might not even be close.
Oh.
We've looked at the league table already. And again, looking through the teams right now, you have to... Of the relegated sides in the Premier League, you've got to be very impressed with Sheffield United, who've done incredibly well to start the campaign. Their defensive record is similar, as we're going to in a second, to Leeds's, but from an attacking point of view, they are winning games, but by marginal goals, and they're not quite as constantly threatening as Leeds are. Apart from that, I don't really see what there is for Leeds to kind of fear. I still don't really get who the challengers are. Like, I think looking at
Sheffield United, Sunderland,
looking at last
Burnley,
year's
Brom.
league table, right? The three teams that went up on 97, 96 and 87 points. Leeds got 90 points. That's 15 points more than West Brom. So like even going into the campaign, they were miles clear of the field. And yes, I understand that Somerville goes and Ruter goes, and that makes them from an attacking point of view a bit weaker, albeit with Nonto and Aronson how much weaker, and Ramazani being added to their roster as well, how much weaker is up for debate. But looking at starting with their defensive unit, like as you mentioned a second ago, teams who get out of this league and like the blueprint for a successful side generally is a really strong defensive unit and that foundation from which your attacking players can flourish. And often it's the case that the stars of the show, the people who everyone talks about, are the attacking players who get the goals. So some of the last season for Leeds. But actually, the reason why their goals, unlike other people's goals, such as Sammy Smodic's, are so pivotal is because they barely concede any. So when they score, it's normally to win games. And with Leeds, more than any other side, including Sheffield United, who we have to remember their good defensive record, including Burnley, who we have to remember their good defensive record, is only over a 9 or 10 game spell. For Leeds, it's over 55, 60 games under Daniel Farke. This is just a mere continuation from what we saw last season from Leeds United, and therefore I see no reason why it would change. Looking on FotMob at XG conceded so far in the campaign, because Leeds have conceded 7 goals, and these have come from an expected 7. So, you'd say that's bang on what you would expect. However, Sheffield United, the lowest was 6.3, Burnley 7.2, Middlesbrough 8, West Brom 8.4. So they're the best defensive sides in the league as per XG. However, this is including penalties. Leeds have given away 2 penalties this season. Both were scored. None of the other sides have given away any penalties. So non-penalty expected goals, Leeds at the bottom. If you then take out set pieces again from that, Leeds are absolutely minimal. We're going into the game against Sunderland. The total XG they conceded from open play was 1.7. So Chris Rigg rolling the ball over the line with like a 0.98 XG chance was like half of their total for the whole season up to that point. They are just a side who, over the course of last season and this season too, do not concede good chances. And that is an absolute hallmark of a side that go on for success. If you look at the saves that Illan Melié's had to make this season, ignoring the free cone goal that came at the end of the game against Sunderland last time out, he's conceded 2 penalties. Apart from that, he's only had to make saves from 4 shots inside the box. There have been 6 shots on target from inside the box from open play. 2 of them have gone in, and he's had to make save from another 4. If anyone watching this on the video will see now from the shot map itself, there are no shots taken like anywhere near the 6-yard box. Like they are completely skirting the issue when it comes to teams creating chances against them, apart from that Rigg effort. And if you look at the where the shot placement itself is, teams have been relatively clinical against them. Like you look at where the goals have gone in, it's basically in the corners, albeit Melié underperforming his expected goals on target or goals prevented significantly. So you've got a side who are basically, the goalkeeper isn't making the saves maybe that he should do, but the opposition are being relatively clinical with the few chances that they make. From an attacking point of view, we know how good they are. They rank second for expected goals going forward, 15.8. So their 15 goals they've scored so far this season, basically bang on what you'd expect. Despite that, their striker, I think, is about to catch fire sometime soon, because Mateo Joseph has only scored 1 goal so far this season. This comes from an XG of 1.93, so it's not massively underperforming, albeit his shot map is generally where you'd want these shots to be taken, kind of between the posts, inside the box, or on the edge of the area. However, he is getting very unlucky, because 9 of his 18 shots this season have been on target. The XG OT, so expected goals on target, is 2.87. He's only scored 1 goal. So keepers are basically pulling off worldies against him. And that will change. So once their striker starts scoring goals consistently, which I think will happen relatively soon, given how confident we can be with Daniel Farke and his side's good defensive record, given the obvious quality they have in Nonto, in Pirot, in all the players they've got. I know they've got a central midfield injury crisis at the moment, but Tanaka and Rothwell is hardly a massive issue, which is what they're lining up with currently. I just think that they are, having been 15 points clear of the rest last season, I don't see too much by way of threat from those in behind them, even if the likes of Sheffield United do maintain their current form. I just think they're comfortably the best team. And they are the team that consistently trip over themselves, and maybe the only thing that can beat them is them. But I don't really believe in hoodoo or teams having an identity that's going to lead to them dropping points. And it wouldn't surprise me if Leeds are clear not long into the new year.
What are you finding hardest to predict in the Championship at the moment?
Luton Town, just kind of full stop.
Right.
I don't know where do we pitch them. That's basically my question now. Well, we've got a team who are currently sitting in 21st position. They've scored 8 goals in their 9 games. They have been really poor for the most part in basically all of them. When you look at the games that they've had as well, and the teams that they've played, and the games in which they've been poor, they were beaten 3-1 away at Argyle. They came away with a 2-2 draw against Oxford in a game where they were fortunate to come away from that. Home against QPR, a side that have really struggled this season. They were beaten 2-1 in a game where, again, they could have lost by plenty more. QPR by far the better side in the second half. They have a manager in Rob Edwards who was so incredibly popular there off the back of that amazing promotion campaign and the valiant effort to stay in the Premier League last season, going toe-to-toe with some of the best teams in the world and coming away with credit in each of those games, who's now looking beleaguered, and the fans are asking him to sort it out. The whole playing squad, whether you're looking at someone like Elijah Adebayo, who showed himself in the Premier League last season to be such a capable striker, who's done it before in the Championship, looking completely out of confidence. The defensive unit, with Mark McGuinness brought in a player for £10 million, I think it was, a transfer fee that Luton fans couldn't dream about spending not very long ago, coming in and looking so awkward in a back three that it just isn't really working. Victor Moses coming in for another stint in English football at right wing back. They are the club right now that I really struggle to understand what they are. The bookies still have them as 20-1 for relegation. There is just a baked in prediction or feeling that they're Luton, they'll sort it out. But it was 2 or 3 years ago that Luton were relegation candidates in the Championship for good reason. Yes, I know they've been to the Premier League and we've seen success and the coffers have been boosted, but remember they are building a new stadium right now, so the spend of that windfall doesn't necessarily go into the playing side of things. So they're the team right now where it wouldn't surprise me at all if they don't sort it out, if they don't improve, and they are embroiled in a relegation battle that could end in relegation at the end of the season. Although similarly, given the players they've got at their disposal, given what we've seen from that club already, it also would be no shock to see them pick up a few wins and suddenly they're looking at the top 6 again. I don't know what they are. I don't know how good they are. I think right now they are really bad, and that is a concern for Luton.
Yeah, that is a big concern for Luton. In terms of teams you've been pleasantly surprised by, I think mine are Derby County and Oxford United. Both are on 12 points after 9 games. They've done it in different ways. Oxford, 3-3-3. 3 wins, 3 draws, 3 losses. Triple Nelson.
And we were 3 wins and 3 losses. And then we drew 3 in a row.
Wow.
Just to make up for it.
Well, that's interesting because Derby are 4 wins, 5 losses. And maybe we're about to get 4 draws in a row now to balance that out. I think both of them are quitting themselves really well and doing so in a manner that isn't super defensive, playing the underdog. Derby do have that in them in certain games, particularly away from home. I think they're finding it much more difficult than they are at Pride Park. But their performances at Pride Park have been really exciting, really industrious, really attacking in many senses. And I think that's a really impressive start to the campaign for them. Who have you been pleasantly surprised by?
Napper. I was there on opening day when they would have beaten 2-0 by Oxford. Johannes Hoff-Thorup is the first appointment from new sporting director Ben Napper. From an outsider's perspective looking in, you see a team that finished 6th last season. Why shouldn't they finish 6th again? Well, they lost Gabriel Sara, who's now playing centre midfield for Galatasaray. They lost John Rowe, who's now scoring worldies for Marseille. They have lost a lot of talent out of that squad, and yet, to my eye, they look like a better team. So I did not see that coming. I didn't think, even though I had faith that the Napper revolution would be successful, I didn't think it would take 6 weeks.
Yeah. Agree. I've really enjoyed watching their last couple of home performances. Underwhelmed by is next up. I think Luton are an obvious answer. I think Coventry City are an obvious answer based on our pre-season expectations for them and how poorly they've started the season. I'd like to explain why I've been underwhelmed by Burnley who are sitting fairly pretty and are doing quite well in terms of a points return. But I've been really underwhelmed by Burnley, and specifically their ability to attack and their ability to entertain. I think that teams that come down from the Premier League should find it easier to attack and entertain. They are the teams that tend to have the best players and the most money, and I therefore hold these teams to pretty high standards when it comes to this sort of thing. And don't get me wrong, for Sheffield United, it's the defensive side of the game that's been more impressive than going forward, but I've still enjoyed watching them attack when it has gone quite well. For Luton, again, they haven't been great on either end of the pitch, to be honest, but I still think they have quite an obvious way of hurting the opposition and creating chances. It just happens that at the moment they haven't been taking them. With Burnley, you have a team who, looking at FotMob, have the 4th lowest XG number in the whole league in terms of XG generated. Burnley, 4th worst. And if you strip out penalties, it's the 3rd worst. Now that's pretty surprising. And there might be people who would say, hold on, I remember 2 years ago, you talked a bit about Burnley overperforming their numbers as they blitz their way to the league playing pretty sexy stuff. Didn't you say this last time? And, they're getting goals anyway, aren't they? Like they did last time. Well, might look like it based on the goal return. But you'd be missing the fact that they scored 9 goals in their first 2 games of the season. Those were wins against Luton, 4-1, and Cardiff, 5-0. Wins that have not aged well at all, given that those two have been among the worst performing teams in the league, given that Luton helped Burnley out, shall we say, with a pretty ridiculously high line that they exploited very well. And Cardiff helped them even more by kicking the ball into their own net without Burnley doing anything to give them a 1-goal lead. Burnley then picking them off on the break after that. The large majority of those 9 goals were quick transition attacks and or exploiting defensive errors. And they scored 9 in 2 games, and that's great. Since then, they have scored 5 goals in 7 games, less than a goal a game. And I'm wondering why, really. I know there was a big turnover in the summer, a turnover of players, but they retained a lot of top-quality players, and they bought a lot of top-quality players, in theory, for the level. And I think about Burnley so far this season, and based on what I just said, that they've been best in transition, on the break, basically. But they don't have the privilege of playing on the break very often, because teams sit in against them. And I think Parker wants them to be a possession-heavy team. I think he's always wanted to be that kind of manager. But at the moment, their possession play is really poor and they're not creating any chances. The good news is they have a very solid defensive shape, a bit like Blades at the moment. They're getting a lot of points because they are excellent out of possession. And that's not just defensively, but also in the press. Looking at FotMob, possession 1 in the final third, 2nd in the league, which when you consider that they're in possession the majority of the time, to have the 2nd most possessions 1 in the final third, pressing high up the pitch, is especially good. That is very, very impressive. So maybe they are prioritising defensive shape, sort of building that first, and then they'll sprinkle the good attacking stuff on top. Or maybe that's just convenience to say because they've been straight up pretty bad going forward and in creating chances. I think it's really interesting at the moment. I don't necessarily know what the answer is. In terms of personnel, there's just a few awkward bits for me. I think if you're going to be a team that has possession as much as they do, fullbacks are really important to your attacking play. And on the left side, I think Pires, the Brazilian's doing pretty well. Parachuted in, having never played in England before. It's the other side that's the issue. The right backs, whether it's been Humphreys, Egan Riley or Connor Roberts, just not giving a huge amount going forward. One of the big sticking points at the moment is Lyle Foster, who's been playing up front. He is offering loads out of possession. His out of possession numbers are really impressive. But he's only had 2 shots on target. We're 9 games in. Burnley striker has only had 2 shots on target. No player in their team has had more than 4 shots on target after 9 games.
I've got a big theory on this.
Yeah.
They've got loads of players who like shooting, and this is proper like amateur psychology stuff. But I think because they all shot quite a lot early in the season, they all went in and they were like, brilliant.
Yeah.
And they've just kept going, and it doesn't really work like that because I watched them against us, and you just drop in deep, let them have the ball. Like you basically stop Koleosho from going around the outside and getting balls in, and then you've got loads of guys who just want to get on it and shoot the whole time. Like Sarmiento in particular is a joke at how often he gets on the ball and just wants to cut inside and shoot. So Brownhill does it, Koleosho does it, and that for Foster, like you're going to get pretty frustrated when all the guys who are meant to be feeding you are just letting fly every time they get anywhere near the goal.
Yeah, I think where I stand is, and this might be a weird way of looking at it, I think a lot of Burnley fans would look at Foster and say, well, he just needs to be dropped. He's not scoring enough goals. I think you need to get more from the fullbacks and from someone in central areas in terms of knitting things together at the very top of the pitch. I think Brownhill's an excellent player and clearly basically their biggest goal threat this season along with Koleosho. I really like Cullen and what he does in deeper areas. And then there's Hannibal, who's mostly playing centre mid at the moment. And I like all of those players, and I can see how it might fit together on paper, but it's just not working at the moment on the pitch. And I think they need to be creating... They need to be better at picking the lock in the final third at the moment. And I don't think that comes down to Lyle Foster, to be honest with you. So it's pretty interesting at the moment. They are unbeaten in their last 6 with 3 wins and 3 draws. So I'm complaining about something that at the moment isn't really coming to fruition in terms of actually hurting them. Maybe there will be a team that keeps a ton of clean sheets and wins by a single goal a lot, and maybe the attacking stuff will kick into gear after international break and they'll start to fly. But at the moment, they're underwhelming me, George. And that was the question. That was the category. I'd like to hear you talk about Queen's Park Rangers, because they're probably next on the list for me. They've somewhat alarmingly had the worst underlying numbers in the period between the 2 international breaks. That's 5 games worth. Really struggling.
Really struggling. And I think the 2 teams that have underwhelmed me are the 2 teams who impressed us the most in the back end of last season. That's QPR and Sheffield Wednesday. I think with both the appointment of Cifuentes and Rowe, it felt like the start of what was going to be a long period of sustained success. And that might still be the case, certainly with Sheffield Wednesday, who've, after a mini blip, have shown some signs recently, did their better. I think my issue with Wednesday is more that I think we were sitting there wondering, is this going to be a team who can challenge for the top 6? And right now, it doesn't really look that way. For QPR, you know, their recruitment in the summer looked quite smart. Like, they made moves over the winter and appointments internally to suggest that their recruitment strategy was going to be very different from the Les Ferdinand days. It was going to be very data-driven. I love the Karamoke Dembele signing, now on a permanent, initially a loan, who started the season well and has faded a little bit. Koki Saito came in with rave reviews from Lummel, where he was seemingly very highly sought after over the summer. Zancelar, another one who came in with a great scoring record. They're not really doing it at this stage. Like the players that have been brought in, the technical players who've been brought in seemingly to offer more of an attacking threat, have really struggled to settle. And the hallmark or the trademark of Martí Cifuentes' good QPR side at the back end of last season was their really, really strong defensive numbers. The fact that teams really struggled to create anything of note against them. I would say it's the opposite now. They've become a bit of a soft touch.
What's happened there?
I do not understand, and I don't know. And this is where, you know, thinking of managerial ability as binary can often really unravel quite quickly, where it's not as simple as, oh, you've got Cifuentes, you were good defensively for a while. Clearly, they have tried to change the way that they want to play this season, maybe by design from him, or maybe he's been told to do that by bringing in the more technically gifted players. And because the attacking output has suffered for that, then naturally, from a defensive standpoint, it's poor. Like, even that game against Luton, I referenced earlier, where QPR were good that day, albeit the form of that win hasn't really aged particularly well given what's happened at Luton since. They still conceded loads of chances, and they nearly conceded late on to a couple. I think Adebayo and Morris both had a chance late. So I'm concerned. I mean, Cifuentes has just signed a new contract, so there seems to be no panic internally, although Saturday sees them host Pompey, and that is a game between 2 sides who really need a win. And I kind of have a feeling whoever comes away, if a team loses that game, there might start to be a finger hovering over the panic button, even though obviously both managers recently renewing their deals with the clubs.
Favourite team to watch quickly? This is kind of, well, the way I've approached this is that this is kind of one for the neutrals who are looking at which fixture to watch every now and again. Might not be how you've approached it. For me, it's Argyle and it's Watford. Those are the matches, I think, as a neutral, if you like action, those are the teams you should watch. Both of them have an approach that I would define as pure vibes. You take a shot, we'll take a shot. Let's see who has the most goals at the end of the game. And I like it. So Plymouth and Watford, I think, best for the neutrals. In fact, I'm just trying to sort out a ticket to Watford against Oxford so I can see the tricky Hornets
I've got mine.
The flesh.
You're not welcome in the away end.
Who's been your favourite team to watch?
And it's Oxford United.
You're so embarrassing, mate. Oh, sorry, did I say that out loud?
Why?
What?
Why?
No, carry on.
They were your team you're most impressed with, most pleasantly surprised by.
I don't like watching it,
though. No, I mean, it's been, as a fan, it's been, I've taken this very literally, it's been incredible to see a side who had a mid-70s point tally in League One last season, who surprised everyone by winning the playoff final, come to the Championship. And I think we all anticipated a season of struggle, and the players and management clearly didn't, because the way that we've started the season, not by looking to be like a low block side who kind of really try and drive down the goal line in games. Yes, sometimes we'll play
Sometimes we'll sit in.
But always carrying a threat on the counter, which has been really impressive and important. I think Des Buckingham's stock continues to rise very highly as a head coach, and I basically love the fact that going into games in the championship level, I didn't think I'd be going into all of them thinking like we can get something from this, and not just a 0-0 draw, although the Burnley game was fairly grim. But as you mentioned, that's because of Burnley, not us.
Yeah, that was genuinely emotional, mate. I'm glad you went for that answer, actually. Thank you. That was special. I thought I was going to try and dig out a few themes for each league before this show, and then it turns out that it's still a bit early to really lean on themes. Like in the Championship, weird quirk so far is that there's been quite a low percentage of away wins compared to normal, and the away teams are finding it harder to score than they normally do. But that could just be early season stuff, and it might rub itself out. So I'll leave that for the moment. I think the one thing I will point out, and this is a trend that started last year, is that tactically, 3 at the back is dead for now. 2 years on from a season where more than half of the 24 teams in the Championship played with 3 centre-backs and wing-backs, it's only Luton and Watford. And actually, in Luton's last game before the break, they played an absolutely insane formation that was not quite the normal 3 at the back. So they might be moving away from that. So that's good. I mean, it's fair to say that in and out of possession shapes look different, and there are lots of teams who tuck a full-back inside and they form a back 3 in possession, etc., etc. Just in terms of basic defensive shape, we are almost exclusively back 4s. 6 more games until the next international break, so we'll probably do another one of these then for the Championship. But let's move on to League One. Before we do, quick note: the England pod, which many of you enjoyed listening to in the summer and some of you did not enjoy listening to in the summer, is back. We're back. Me, George and Dave Walker are back doing the England pod after a short break to recharge and plan for the future. And there's going to be a future. Maybe it'll be a bright future if we win the World Cup in 2026, and maybe we'll be there doing the England pod. For the FA. Wednesday, there'll be an episode looking back, not just focusing on like all the hullabaloo from this international break, but just a big old overview of Carsley and all that sort of stuff, and what we hope might happen going forward, and who we want to be the next manager. So listen to the England pod on Wednesday by Not the Top 20. Only 2 games in League One over the weekend, but you wouldn't even know it from the goals tally. 14 in 2 games.
I like your eyes there made it suggest that despite you making copious amount of notes, you hadn't actually written down how many goals.
Well, I hadn't. I had to count. Crawley 3, Shrewsbury 5, Peterborough 3, Rotherham 3. That's
8
14.
plus 6. Yeah.
14. George, Crawley 3, Shrewsbury 5. 2 of the favourites for relegation. So these points really do matter a lot. And Shrews got them in a game with 8 goals in it. What the hell?
I don't think anyone in the history of football has called a game worse than I called this.
Oh.
On the betting show on Thursday,
Yeah.
I was like, this stinks of a 0-0. You've got a team in Crawley, you've barely scored a goal all season, 2 relegation candidates, struggling attacks. Can't see there be many chances. Both teams probably take a draw. 3-5.
The old 3-5.
I mean, it was a game that really swung on a red card, where the first half wasn't really a game of many chances. John Marquis put Shrewsbury ahead after Crawley had dominated the first 20 minutes or so, with an effort that I would have thought Conall Trueman, the Crawley keeper, will think he should have saved. He got a big hand to it, squirmed under him. Will Swan equalised shortly after that. 1-1 at half-time, probably a fair reflection of the game so far, and very little indication as to what was to come after the break, where after 56 minutes, Josh Flint, it was one of those where like, it's definitely a first yellow, so therefore it should be a second yellow, but if you're a Crawley fan, you're there thinking, that's not a second yellow. He kind of just tugs back on the shoulder of the Shrewsbury attacker and gets his marching orders.
It wasn't like the tuggiest of tugs either,
No,
was it?
like
I don't think he got a huge amount of flesh or shirt.
Didn't get much purchase.
No.
It was almost like a tap.
Yeah.
Like if it was touch rugby, it's a tackle. But if it's
God,
normal
I'm
rugby...
so glad it's not touch rugby.
If it's normal rugby, he just carries on running.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's football. But then Quaterna scored the back post, make it 2-1 to Crawley, so 10-man Crawley lead, and that's where chaos really ensued with Nsiala nodding home at the back post. And then after that, it was just wave after wave of Shrewsbury attacks. George Lloyd getting a brace, Marquis scoring a penalty. So before a deflected effort from Kelly found its way in from a free kick to make it 5-3. I don't think we can learn too much from this. Like I think it was a game of relatively few chances until a red card and a goal from the team of 10 men kind of saw chaos ensue afterwards. I think Shrewsbury will take a hell of a lot out of it, though. I think for them to go away from home and score 5 will be really significant in their own belief as to what they can do this season. For Rob Elliott and his Crawley side, he'll be really frustrated that when the game was kind of there for the taking in his first home game in charge, a red card has kind of seen them dealt a massive blow to their chances, albeit for them to capitulate in the way they did, it was pretty staggering, I would say, especially although I guess they started chasing the game when they went 2-1 down late on. But an unbelievable game, a thrilling game, not one that I saw coming whatsoever, and that's why we love the EFL.
Yeah, I'd like to see Crawley tighten up a bit. Perhaps it's not a huge surprise that the team that had the 5th worst non-penalty XG against in League 2 last season is also not
They're all
thriving
different
on
players
that front.
basically now, though.
Well, exactly. They don't have a generational shot stopper in nets.
No.
As Corey Adai was
Quite the
last
opposite,
season.
I would say.
My only note from this game, other than to say a lovely stat, which is it's the first time in 13 years that Shrews scored 5 goals in an away league fixture, which is a bit of fun for those travelling fans. There was also people know that I love a centre-back open play goal. Here we had a centre-back open play assist, which is not quite as good, but almost as good. And it was Feeney for the first goal, trotting on from that right centre-back role in the back three, popularised by Christopher Wilder, bombing on, lost his man, ball into him, ball across, Marquis finish. Well done, Feeney.
Do you know something that I stumbled upon in my prep for 5 Live on Saturday?
No, I don't actually.
I was looking at how many goals and assists Crawley had lost from their side last season. Mm-hmm. Firstly, in all competitions, Orsi and Lolos was 40 goals, which kind of blew my mind.
Wow.
And then Kelly, 15 assists. Guess who else they lost with 9 assists to his name?
Sarula.
Will Wright.
9
assists last season.
Yeah, set piece wizard.
That's class, that.
And those deep crosses from the right centre-back area. There you go. Probably some OPCB assists there from Will Wright, I imagine. Peterborough 3, Rotherham 3 was also a pretty wacky game. Peterborough went 1-0 up through James Dornelly, a 19-year-old academy right-back who's getting a few starts, one to keep an eye on. And then Nombe, 1-1. The most literal representation I think I've ever seen of the football cliche, he just needs one to go in off his arse.
Yeah.
He scored one off his arse against Cambridge when he was lying on the floor and the ball bounced off him.
And now he's away.
He has 3 in his last 3 games. And he looks really sharp and really confident. It's absolutely incredible. I'm trying to think which other stupid football cliches we could actually have like a literal physical representation of. One to think about. Tweet us at NTT20pod. Malik Wilks had hit the bar early on with quite a spicy long shot, and it turns out he was really in the mood because this was probably the goal of the weekend. He got on the ball, he knocked it down the line, and he burned Jack Sparks for pace. And then as he got onto the ball, instead of wasting time with a couple of touches, he chopped inside immediately. He wriggled inside Sparks and then hit it first time into the far corner. It was electric from Malik Wilks, and it's really exciting to see him doing that sort of stuff after a few years without having doing that sort of stuff. Johnson Clark-Harris scored against his old club to make it 3-1, did his hamstring while scoring, which is quite impressive, and then came off immediately. And in the second half, Posh came back into it. 2 goals from Jack Sparks' corners. He has a lovely delivery. And big Manny Fernandez, young centre-back, he's already got a couple of goals this season. He's going to score a lot of headers in his career because he is huge and he's got springs in his boots, which I thought was illegal, but apparently is not illegal.
If you're a Posh fan going to that game on Saturday, and all you're thinking is, I'm just dreading Johnson Clark-Harris scoring against us, a player who scored 31 and 26 goals in 2 campaigns at League One level before basically being moved to the sidelines last season because he wouldn't either leave the club or sign a new contract.
Sabbatical.
I would probably go as far as saying, I reckon if Clark-Harris they just played him up front last season, they probably would have gone up.
Ooh, okay.
When he was fit. And like that moment where you see the Clark-Harris are going to score and it's going to put you 3-1 down. Like, surely the ideal from there is, he's got injured and then we're going to score 2 goals and we're now going to draw the game 3-3, albeit not necessarily win. But it was an amusing, if you're a Posh fan, I guess, an amusing twist of fate, the way that ended up going after he scored.
And you got to see your goalkeeper, Jed Steer, make a save of the season contender. Can't speak today. To save a point for you, saving a header, steering it wide, did Jed. That was a pretty fun weekend in League One, even with just the 2 games. Let's do a state of the nation of League One. At the top of it, Birmingham are on 22 points from 9 games. Wrexham are on 20 from 10. Mansfield also on 20, but from 9 games. And then you get to Lincoln, who are 4th. From them to Bristol Rovers in 18th, there is a batch of 15 teams separated by 5 points. So, as excited as I have been to do State of the Nation podcast today, what I'm realising in reality is there's still huge chunks of teams separated by barely any points, and it's quite hard to sift through the wreckage. But at the very top, George, fair to say that Birmingham were pretty heavy favourites for the title pre-season, and now extraordinarily large favourites for the league title. And Wrexham, who came up from League 2 last season, and Mansfield, who came up from League 2 last season, are 2nd and 3rd. So pretty fun at the top of League 1, but with one very large fish, a blue whale, if you like.
Yeah, and they're top of the table already from 2 points clear of Wrexham, who played a game more. They're 2-5, I think, with the bookies to win the league. Their spending, I think, quite clearly exceeded anything that we anticipated when they got relegated in May. The quality of the players they brought in, the appointment of Chris Davis, who obviously comes with a really high calibre off the back of his coaching career, working for Brendan Rodgers, and Ange Postecoglou, who I think actually turned down the Swansea job, or reportedly did so a year or so ago too. Everything about them is just not League One, and that should be enough to get you out of League One. However, we've seen other teams try and basically blast their way out of the league, albeit not to this extent, and fail. I think it is incredibly likely that Birmingham will improve as the season goes on and will win the league. I don't necessarily think it's the foregone conclusion that some are saying that it is. I still can't really remember a dominant team putting in quite as toothless a display as we saw from them at Charlton last time out. And if they have the capability or the incapability to put in a performance like that at points this season, that has to be a concern, especially when you couple it up with a pretty poor performance against Reading on opening day, a pretty poor performance against Wigan that they scored in the last kick of the game in the 98th minute to win it 2-1. So I'm not willing to give them the title in October, albeit they are clearly the favourites and rightly so.
Yeah, so my strongest stance in League One at the moment is that I think it's nigh on impossible not to see Birmingham in the top 2. And that's not even a particularly impressive prediction. I will also say, yeah, it's a strong stance they're going to win the title. And you've touched on them. So I'll tell you why. Part of the reason why I think they'll win the title is because of the other teams. I'm unconvinced that there's another team, regardless of how impressive you think Birmingham's performance level is. I believe in it over 46 games. I believe in the points tally being high 90s. And I don't think there's another team that I could see putting together the sort of season that takes them all the way. Think back 2 years ago. Ipswich Town, they were good, weren't they? They went up 2 years in a row. But they didn't win League One because Plymouth Argyle had a season for the ages and pipped them to the title. I'm struggling to see who could be the Argyle to Birmingham's Ipswich, and so I do see them winning the league. I also think it's fair to point out they've had almost the toughest fixture list in the league so far. Like, certainly if you take pre-season expectations and ratings of teams, they've played like 5 of the other favourites for the title, and they've rocked them all, apart from Charlton, famously, last time out. It doesn't get that much easier either. They've got stubborn Stevenage up next, then no, I'm going in the wrong order. They've got Lincoln away next, then Bolton at home, then Mansfield away. That's 4th and 3rd. They're playing in their next 2 away games. And then they've got stubborn Stevenage after that. So it's quite an interesting spell for Birmingham. But overall, I think that what they're doing and the way that they're playing and their tactical approach, I really like it. I think they are still working out how to make it work, playing a style that is basically trying to replicate the elite teams at the very top of the Premier League. And I wouldn't suggest that that's a great approach for everyone, or maybe for anyone else in League One. But I think for them and for where they want to get to and the players that they're looking to sign, I think it's absolutely what they should be trying to do. And I think there's a lot to like, and I think there's a lot to improve on. Defending transitions has been an issue at times. just execution in the final 20 yards or so, that's pretty normal for a high possession team early on in the season, I would suggest. So I'm pretty all in on Birmingham. Outside of that, at the top anyway, I think my strongest stance is that Stockport look very strong and in quite a sustainable way. So I think my bet for second place right now would probably be Stockport. Anything on that?
Yeah, well, they're my favourite team to watch.
Oh, nice.
And why wouldn't you love watching them? I mean, I think there are so many teams these days who are great to watch almost in like extended highlights packages where they see a lot of the ball. A lot of the time they're retaining the ball fairly deep. And what you want to see is the moves that yield chance creation effectively. Whereas the Stockport, you've got a side who are pretty relentlessly mobile in a forward direction. You've got players. I mean, I think from an individual player standpoint, there are very few players as enjoyable to watch as Louis Barry. They are a consistent goal threat, even in games where they don't come away with 3 points. If you look through their games this season, their underlying numbers are phenomenal, like so dominant in basically every game that they play in. They're not a side who are liberal with their shot locations. They look to swarm the box. They're a side that I love watching last season in League Two. I think that Dave Challoner has created something that's relatively rare in this day and age, a winning football side who are easy on the eye without being necessarily overly possession heavy. Mm-hmm. And there's a place for that. And I think it's a very good way for a club in League One to pitch themselves. So I'm a big fan of watching them. And I definitely agree. Like, I think that they are a team who have the staying power. And also, I should mention, who doesn't want to watch Ollie Norwood sitting midfield, just pulling strings?
Ping, ping, ping. Yeah, I mean, I think 2nd to 6th spots, given that I'm taking Birmingham as first at this point, you are not necessarily.
Well,
I'm
probably.
Yeah, but probably.
Yeah,
for
but
me,
not
2nd to 6th, those spots are very, very hard to predict. It just looks like it could be an almighty scrap, partly because there's a large group of teams that have been quite good in like 2/3 of their games and like quite bad in the other third of their games, and that's why they have the points return that they do. We've had teams like Huddersfield and Bolton and Rotherham who are all up there in terms of being favourites for promotion, not having a great start to the season. They're all 9th or below at this point. Barnsley haven't been great either, and then, which is great, we've had a group of teams that have been much better than expected so far as well. You've got Mansfield in 3rd, Lincoln in 4th, Wickham in 5th, Exeter in 7th. So it's really interesting at the moment. I think it makes it very, very difficult to predict. I also think if we look at the bottom of the league now, George, where I'll start with Wigan, they're 16th on 13. Reading and Bristol Rovers also have 13. Then there's a drop of 5 points already between 18th and 19th. The bottom 6 has Orient, Northampton and Shrews on 8 points. Northampton have played 9, Leyton Orient have played 10, Shrews have played 11 there. And then Crawley on 7, and then Burton on 4, and Cambridge on 1. I'm not sure who could possibly drop into relegation trouble outside of the current bottom 5 or 6, but I've followed these leagues long enough to know that someone probably will, and that some of those teams will start to somehow put something together and crawl out of it. So, do you think that group of teams are just going to get cut off, or do you think it's too early to say?
Too early to say. I think it's very, very rare that in October a segment of the league just becomes annexed and becomes their own mini league. Normally there's a team that will climb out of it due to either just an upturn of form, or they make a change of manager, or they have January business that goes very well or something. And there are normally teams that currently aren't even on the radar of those sides who will, for whatever reason, go through a massive crisis of confidence or an injury issue, or their manager will get poached and they'll fall back into it. I've got no doubt that there will be teams currently with double digits points who will end up embroiled in a relegation battle. Who they might be, I don't know. I mean, if Ruben Sellers says goodbye to Reading because of the off-field issues and becomes Cardiff manager, that will just compound what is already a very difficult time for them. Wigan's attacking numbers need to improve. They've only conceded 5 goals this season. If that changes and they start shipping goals, then things could turn pretty sour. Like a 13-point haul from conceding 5 goals in 10 games. I mean, obviously the defensive record is good, but that spells problems for me in terms of what they're doing going forward. And even teams like, Stevenage, who for me are the team that I want to pick out as my pleasantly surprised team, where I don't think you can really. I think Alex Revell's done an incredible job there, frankly. I think that Steve Evans had done, up to the point that he decided to leave last season to go to Rotherham, had done the best job of any manager in the country over the period of time that he took over a Stevenage side destined for non-league and quickly turned them into a team who arguably should have won the title in League Two, but got one promotion automatically out of League Two, and then were a mid-table at worst. Like, they were challenging for the playoffs under Evans for much of last season. To follow that, to see a fair overhaul of players, whether he brought in a lot of players over the summer, albeit key players such as Jamie Reid, and others, obviously stayed at the club. But to maintain that level, given Evans's obvious experience in the game, given that Revell doesn't really have that necessarily, albeit he was part of the coaching staff, to make them still defensively so solid, still having Pierre Gianni being a huge threat from set pieces. I think sometimes continuing a good job is almost harder than taking over a team and doing a good one yourself. And I definitely had them down as relegation candidates, but they've been nowhere near that so far this season. So credit to him.
Yeah, fair to say I've been pleasantly surprised by the three teams that you'd say are all the kind of overperforming, both in terms of their preseason expectations and, as it turns out, in terms of their underlying numbers. But I don't think we need to worry too much right now that if you look at Ben Griffiths' expected points table and you look at which teams have got more points than their XP would suggest, it is Mansfield in first, and then it's Lincoln in third and Exeter in fourth. But those are the three teams that I've been pleasantly surprised by, because I think that we shouldn't criticise overperforming your underlying numbers. They have shown all some pretty good spirit, some good resolve, and in many cases some excellent finishing as well, and particularly in the case of Mansfield. I think with Exeter and Lincoln, what they're doing out of possession is giving them a really strong platform, and they are working out ways to hurt the opposition as well. I'm probably a touch more convinced with Lincoln in attack than Exeter in attack, and so I would probably pitch Lincoln as being more likely to stay up there than Exeter. But I think we should celebrate all three of those teams for having an excellent start to the season. But it's also probably Wycombe. And I think it's worth saying that in Wycombe, we've got a team, George, that picked up the fourth most points from February onwards last season. Now, these were no jeopardy points, These were end-of-season good vibes points. And so sometimes you can say, well, see what happens when they matter a little bit more. Well, they matter now, and they're doing pretty well. They're now fifth in the table with 5 wins in 7, and their 2 defeats this season were against the two teams at the top of the table, Wrexham and Birmingham. And they lost 3-2 to both of them, so they gave it a pretty good go. Wycombe are who I'm most pleasantly surprised by. When it comes to being underwhelmed by a League One team, I probably would say Rotherham at this point, partly because it's a failing of my own. I had complete clarity with Rotherham pre-season. Complete clarity as to what Steve Evans was doing and how it would look on the pitch, and a level of points that would be accrued immediately because they got all that business done early. And it hasn't looked anything like that. So that was just wrong, and that's annoying.
Yeah.
What about you in terms of underwhelmed?
Underwhelmed by Burton Albion. So much positivity at the club after the purchase by the Nordic Football Group. So much positivity when you look at the players they brought in, and understandably so. Like, I know the volume was insane, but like real proven quality in there. Elliot Watt, Billy Bowden, and just an obvious investment into the playing side of things. Mark Robinson's a manager that you and I both really appreciated at his time at AFC Wimbledon, and kind of believed that the way it fell apart wasn't necessarily his fault, but they yet to win a game. And even though they started the season playing a certain way, I wouldn't say it's necessarily been quite as attractive. I don't think the aim or the ambition to play attractive football hasn't necessarily necessitated in a particularly attacking and attractive side. Like, I think in patches we've seen it, in flashes we've seen it. I think Bowden's injury has definitely harmed their creativity and efficiency in the final third. But right now they are, again, a team that I think League One sides are enjoying playing against, and that, I thought that maybe the ambition of the ownership, and you have to say it's very, very early days for these new owners, and I think their actions so far suggest that they are doing things that will in long term benefit the football club, but maybe they are running before they can walk.
Peterborough probably my favourite team to watch so far, just because 40 goals have gone in across their 11 games, which is very Peterborough FC. Peterborough United FC. Full name them if you're going to FC them. That's the rule. Wickham and Mansfield, pretty good from a neutral's point of view as well. And I like Lincoln's tactics a lot. Even though it doesn't lead to tons of excitement in each penalty box, I respect it.
My strongest stance is the thing. You think you dominate the stances in this podcast. I think that Cambridge won't finish bottom. Because, as listeners to the pod who've listened to it for a while will know, I am a slave to the data. And I just don't believe that a team, even though they've got 1 point so far this season, even though they haven't been ahead at all this season, and even though game state will play a big part in their underlying numbers, Cambridge are just so much better than their underlying numbers, where they...
So much better than their results. They're not better than their underlying numbers.
Sorry, they're so much better than their results. They are their underlying numbers.
Underlying numbers are just counting stuff. That's what I've always said.
Facts.
Facts.
They're counting facts.
Yes, please.
That
happened. Log it. That happened. Log it. Times a million.
Their underlying numbers are... Like the two teams that sit above them, their XG ratio are Mansfield and Wrexham, albeit those two sides massively overperforming theirs by the same measure. But they sit above Orient, Burton, Exeter, Crawley, Bristol Rovers, Northampton and Shrewsbury. There's going to be a run of games relatively soon if things don't change where they're just going to pick up a couple of wins. Like they're losing marginal games by a goal consistently. And I think in the same way that I was convinced that Gillingham would start conceding goals relatively soon, I think that it won't be long before Cambridge are looking at more than just the solitary point on the board.
In League 2 we had 10 games and they have been broken down pretty nicely on NTT20.com's Weekend Notes. Time to plug that because we've had last week a piece by Hugh called Is Possession Overrated? And there's a lot of good League 2 stuff in there. There's also some great stats and 1,000 words from me on Carlisle United. And there's a lot to say about Carlisle United. On Weekend Notes, on NTT20.com. It's free to read. If you sign up with your email address on NTT20.com, you get it every Monday morning. And it doesn't take away from the pod. We've made it specifically different to the pod. So there you go. Get involved. Barrow lost 1-0 to Morecambe. That was Morecambe's first win of the season at the 11th time of asking. And it's a bit of a spicy derby game. So, Morecambe, you get to lead off the pod. Not much happened in the game, though. So I'm probably not going to bang on about it. I think it's fair to say both teams found it pretty hard to create a lot on the peninsula this weekend. But the winner came from a moment of quality, the left boot of Adam Lewis. If there's one thing that we've always known about Adam Lewis, it's that the kid can cross. And that's what he did. And it's a pretty good trait for a left wing-back to have. Ben Tollett scoring. Second in 2 games for him, winning it for Morecambe, a tight game that they're on the right side of for the first time this season.
Morecambe this season have played 2nd, Donny, 3rd, Notts County, 4th, Walsall, 5th, Gillingham, Barrow in 6th, Bradford in 7th, Crewe in 8th, and Fleetwood in 10th. So they've played 8 of the current top 10 already. Just Port Vale and AFC Wimbledon, the 2 teams haven't played in the top 10. I don't want to skip forward. And they haven't lost any of those games by more than a goal. They've drawn 3 of them. They've won one of them. They might not be as bad as everyone thinks.
They are not as bad as everyone thinks. And just a touch of detail as well, because we haven't spoken very positively about them this season on account of them not having won a game yet. Derek Adams, he is always tasked with trying to make something work from a squad that is generally recruited from, for want of a better phrase, the bargain bucket. We touched on it over the summer with our transfer coverage. Morecambe signed a whole squad on one day because they needed to sign a whole squad because all their players from last season had left. And Morecambe, because of issues off the field, because of a naturally low budget anyway, are not a hugely attractive option for a lot of League 2 players that might have other options. So they sign players broadly from the local area who might want to stay in that area, or players who just wouldn't get another contract at League 2 level and would probably be National League players otherwise. And I just really admire what he's able to do in those conditions. He always seems to find a tactical setup and a core group of players that are able to perform roles that he gives them. In this instance, he seems to have settled on a 3-5-2 shape, with Lewis at left wing-back being quite a key part of it in terms of delivering good balls into the box. And Marcus Dackers has been starting up front. Now, it's a little bit like what Newport have with Anthony Glennon, the left wing-back, and Kyle Hudlin. Basically, if you've got an excellent crosser of the ball, get a striker that's 6'6" or above and spam some crosses in and make some memories. That's what they're doing. And that's what they did here at Barrow. A great day out for Morecambe. Good on them. There was also a big away win by 1-0. Port Vale on the right side of it, beating MK Dons to become the next team to go top of League Two.
And they were pretty good for it as well. I mean, Port Vale are a side who defensively are so solid, and an MK Dons side who'd scored, I think, in 25 consecutive home league games, struggled to really make an impact at all within the game. They struggled to create anything of note. There was one moment where Nemain did a really nice spin and should have squared it, but shot, and the shot was tipped over the bar. But for all of their possession under Scott Lindsay, MK really struggled to create too much. It was Port Vale who, on the counter, were able to were basically the side throughout the game who looked more likely to score. And when the goal itself came, welcome to the party, Jack Shorrock. Because
that made me make all kinds of noises.
It's so funny. So basically, he's a 17-year-old, currently playing left wing back, taught that he might be a left winger going forward, and judging by this delivery, that would make sense.
Isn't that what a left wing back role is, mate? A left winger going forward, a left back defensively.
Correct. Yeah. The ball itself, when you first see it, and you kind of think he shanked it at the keeper, and then it just beautifully curls into the path of Hackford, the striker on loan, who tucks it away. It's a lock pick of a ball, basically. Like, there is nothing on, and he manages to find Hackford bending it around the centre back. This game, watching it back, basically to me was just Jayden Stockley getting really frustrated all game at people not passing him the ball, where just consistently Port Vale players getting to decent positions and letting fly, with Stockley better positioned. But Port Vale looked good, and as I say, they were happy to let MK Dons have the ball. Kelly had very little in terms of creative opportunities, and they're top of the league now after what was a really disappointing start to the season. And so vindication for Darren Moore and what they're doing. They look absolutely rock solid to me, Port Vale.
Agree. Wimbledon beat Carlisle 4-0. I was there to see it. It means that Wimbledon's last two home games, which were famously quite a few weeks apart on account of some bunkers that popped up on their pitch due to some flooding. Both their last two home games have been against sides managed by Mike Williamson. First, it was his MK Dons side. They beat them 3-0. Here, it was his Carlisle side. They beat them 4-0. Can we play you every week? No, you can't. Wimbledon have now won their last 6 games at Plough Lane by an aggregate score of 18-3. Last time they won 6 straight at home was when they were in the Connie South, long time ago. And home was Kingsmeadow, not the beautiful Plough Lane. Now, one thing that I'm impressed by is how good they are defensively, how good their shape is, and how good their press is. It's not a case of just sitting back and defending, clearing your lines. There's a lot more to it. But not only that, doing so even with quite a lot of disruption in that back three. When they started the season, I was like, that's a nice back three. Ogundere right centre-back, Lewis central centre-back, Ryan Johnson left centre-back. But Lewis and Johnson not in the team at the moment. Lewis through injury, Johnson was on the bench. Ogundere is playing left centre-back because Riley Harbottle is now the right-sided centre-back. And they played the centre midfielder, James Ball, as their central centre-back. And they were absolutely fine. Didn't have an impact on their out possession or defensive ability. And I think that reflects very well on Johnny Jackson, very well on his staff as well. That's also with James Tilley at left wing-back. That's a very attack-minded wing-back. That's Josh Neufville at right wing-back. Very attack-minded right wing-back. But they are among, if not the best defensive team in the league, and that is very impressive. But they get plenty at the top of the pitch as well. Omar Bugil, I think he might be one of the best players in League Two. I don't think people outside of Wimbledon necessarily see him as such, but he gives them so much. Where he falls down, and where someone like Andy Cook probably overtakes him maybe in terms of my rankings of League 2 number 9s, is that he's not a particularly comfortable finisher. Quite good with his head, not very good with his feet, as we saw when he ran through one-on-one. Decided to try and absolutely smash the lever off the ball, and it skewed well wide of the post. But Matty Stevens scored a hat-trick, and in Stevens they have got a very good finisher, proven at this level previously, and seemingly back to his best after a bad injury. And they've got off the bench at 65 minutes, Joe Piggott and Josh Kelly, who offer plenty as well. So I think they're in pretty good shape, Wimbledon. I'm pretty excited about them. In terms of Carlisle, I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of words on Carlisle. I've written over 1,000 of them on ntt20.com in weekend notes. And I think in the interests of moving on to the state of the nation in League Two, it's worth, if you'd like to hear my thoughts on what was a shambolic performance, head to ntt20.com and you can read all about it there. George, Gillingham 1, Accrington 2. This is 2 wins in a row for Aki and 3 defeats in a row for Gills.
Yeah, I mean, Gillingham scored through Armani Little early in the second half in a game that kind of very little had happened in the first half. And that goal really changed the game, where from then on, Accrington were by far the dominant force. And I think for Gillingham fans, massive frustration at the inability at home, having taken the advantage to shut out a side who had only picked up their first win of the campaign in the week before. Woods scored the equaliser for Accrington after an hour, and even then it was Accrington who poured forward. And when Dara Costello scored in injury time, it was fully deserved. Costello with 3-2 now after his brace against Morecambe. For Gillingham, their somewhat fortunate run defensively is very much over now. Teams are now able to score against them, as we've seen with the 3 consecutive defeats. The performances themselves, when you look at the underlying numbers, haven't drastically changed. They're still pretty similar in terms of the chances they're giving away. The difference just being that teams against them are putting at the back of the net. I think you have to look at the campaign as a whole so far for Gillingham. Like if you told Gills fans that under Mark Bonner in his first 11 games they pick up 19 points and sit 5th, they probably would have been pretty happy. Obviously, the way that things have unravelled, it's not going to feel that way, but it's up to Bonner now to ensure that he doesn't panic and can kind of see the bigger picture, I guess, and see that things may not have been as good as they looked after 6 games, and things maybe aren't quite so bad as they look after 11 too. Massive credit to Accrington, another team like Morecambe who, with Accrington, the underlying numbers were never as bad as the results suggested they were, but back-to-back wins against Morecambe and Gillingham has them out of the relegation zone. And again, they look like another team who could be a fair bit better than we thought. Costello certainly looking pretty lively. He's physical, he's very direct. Such a good finish for the winner as well.
Yep.
Finding the far corner. So
yep. He's got 4 in his last 3, and 3 of them brilliant finishes. Yeah. The other a pen.
He looks good. So yeah, positive for Accrington, and for Gills, I think they're just on the receiving end of a nasty bout of variance.
Grit your teeth, get through it. Back-to-back bantams, that's Bradford City. They beat Tranmere 2-0. It's been a good week for them since the last Monday pod because they played on Monday night and they beat Newport 3-1. Didn't have it easy, but won by 2 goals. And you could probably say the same about their game against Tranmere, where they had their talismanic striker Andy Cook to thank for 2 goals. One of them lovely rifled finish from just outside the box, and the second finishing off a counter-attack to ice the cake. Cook is now the league's top scorer with 7. I did quite a big bit on him for FotMob Corner last month, so you'll know already that I absolutely love Andy Cook. One thing I want to point out that I think is astounding, astonishing, and the sort of thing that does not get celebrated enough in a world where things that footballers do get celebrated, the one thing that often gets forgotten is availability. It is a passion of mine. Andy Cook has only been unavailable for 11 of the last 149 league games, spanning 3 and a bit seasons with Bradford. 93% availability, George, for your talismanic number 9, who puts in so much work as well, physically, as well as scoring the most goals in the league in that time, by a distance, by the way, and being one of its best target man. And most importantly, a perfect villain. A fantastic villain. And we need these in the pantomime of League Two football. Every goal celebrated with angry passion, and in particular the goals that he scores against his former clubs. In 20 Bradford appearances against Tranmere, Walsall and Mansfield, the 3 clubs that Cook has previously represented in the EFL, Cook has scored 14 goals, and 2 of them here came against Tranmere. They'd love Andy Cook still, because they've only scored 5 goals in 10 league games, and that is exceptionally bleak. It's not very Nigel Adkinsy, is it? And there's a tiny bit of hope. That is that players like Brad Walker, most hydrated player in League Two, the water carrier Brad Walker, and Kieran Morris and Luke Norris, all 3 of those guys have only started 4 of 10 league games so far this season, but they're all now available from whatever absences they had, and that should give Tranmere some hope, and they need that at the moment because they are really poor. Really poor. Cheltenham 2, Swindon 3 was pretty entertaining fare. 5 goals in the West Country.
Yeah, this is one of those games where you look at the stats and you'll think, Cheltenham are actually okay. No, they weren't. They were 3-0 down and deservedly so in this game, where Swindon were by far the better side. The first game was a game of relatively few chances, but Cox and Wright putting away Swindon's best two of the half before the kid McGregor finished off a nice chance, just 18 years old, Joel McGregor, finishing at the back post after a corner was recycled. And Swindon were pretty good value for that 3-0 win, that 3-0 lead in a game where these two aren't too far apart. Both had endured pretty poor starts to the season. I think this was a game that both sets of fans would have really seen as an opportunity to kickstart their campaign, and for Cheltenham to not really turn up until they were 2-0 down would have been mighty disappointing. Miller and Archer scored the 2 goals for Cheltenham to get them back into it, but they were unable to force an equaliser. This is the game, I made some excuses for Cheltenham in the betting show on Thursday. I think the first hour or so of this game is probably the moment where I think that our pre-season hunch that Cheltenham might be real strugglers in this campaign might come to the front of my mind again. And there's a clutch of teams, Carlisle being one of them, Cheltenham being another one of them, where this Saturday was a total and utter disaster, where I think their performances really brought to light just how poor they are on the same weekend that the two teams that I think they all hoped were just going to be desperate and cut adrift in Morecambe and Accrington showed everyone that might not be the case.
Yeah, goals from each of their wing-backs, and McGregor is definitely worth a watch. The youngsters made a real big impact in a couple of appearances in the last few weeks, and Cox, you could say the same about the left wing-back, who was playing over in the Netherlands before joining Swindon. Harrogate beat Newport 1-0. Pretty poor game here without a lot of action and decided by, I'm afraid, a bit of a clanger. We quite saw this for Newport because their goalkeeper, Townsend, who's been excellent for them this season and previously, was called up by Antigua. And so he was off in the Caribbean. Jacob Carney replaced him in nets and just dropped a cross, which was then headed in by Sims. Yeah, big win for Harrogate. Newport have, such a kind of topsy-turvy season in terms of results so far. They have lost 5 of their 6 away from home, and they're starting to look like a team who really struggle to impose themselves and their style of play when they travel. Grimsby, on the other hand, George, have won 3 league games in a row, having won just 2 of 28 before that. This one came at Salford, 2-1.
Yeah, I watched this live with my Grimsby Town supporting father-in-law on the sofa.
Love it.
Ridiculous game. They scored after a minute, within a minute, I should say, which, you can never really say is particularly deserved, but they started pretty fast. When Cole Stockton got the equaliser from a corner for Salford, it kind of felt like maybe that's the way the tide was turning. But a deflected effort just before half-time from the same goal scorer, Luca Barrington, who's on loan from Brighton, put Grimsby 2-1 up. And the second half was one of those games where, as an away fan, it feels like it takes probably 5.5 hours. As a home fan, it feels like it's over after about 10 minutes because it was just wave after wave of Salford pressure. But credit to Grimsby, because even though Salford had all the territory and all the shots, I think they totaled 26 in the game, and it felt like they might score at any time. Smith in goal for Grimsby didn't have to make any spectacular saves, but did everything he had to very well. They restricted Salford to mainly long-range shots, which when Cole Stockton and Conor McElhaney are both playing, and John Taylor, to be fair as well, isn't a massive surprise. McElhaney had, how many was it? I looked before. McElhaney totaling 6 shots, all of which were from distance, which is a classic Connor. But they were unable to find a way through. So, good for Grimsby, who now sit 8th, a really promising start to the season under David Artell. Whereas for Salford and Carl Robinson, they're definitely looking a bit more functional than they were early on in the campaign, but still struggling to be a side that I would say can create consistent good chances for a striker like Stockton. It feels like they're still got a lot of players who like to let fly from range.
2 draws, Chesterfield 2, Notts County 2. It was quite an entertaining early televised game. Saturday lunchtime, we had Paddy Madden putting Chesterfield ahead. We had Jata equalising for Notts County. We had Grigg putting Chesterfield ahead. We had McGoldrick equalising for Notts County. So 3 sort of legends of lower league football goal scoring in Madden, Grigg and McGoldrick. Actually harsh to say lower league football goal scoring for McGoldrick. Most of his career played at Championship and some Premier League as well, of course. And Jata, who's a real new kid on the block, whose goal rate is absurd since joining in January. All square, McGoldrick's penalty at the end A bit harsh, I thought, for Chesterfield, who probably, I think, would have just about deserved and edged what was a pretty entertaining and competitive game that had a lot of spells for both teams. As it was, a 2-2 draw, 1-1 in the rematch from last season's playoff semi-final between Doncaster and Crewe. An absolutely brilliant goal from Max Conway, 21-year-old wing-back for Crewe on loan from Bolton. He burst forward after a quick turnover, and then as he carried it to the edge of the box and you wondered what this wing-back was going to do next, was he going to get a nosebleed? How about a dummy shot that sent both centre-backs packing before smashing it into the corner? Absolutely brilliant goal. Cancelled out by Kyle Hurst off the bench. I think the nature of Donny's equaliser will be super frustrating for Lee Bell, where you know you're going to come under pressure at Doncaster when you're 1-0 up. So make them break you down. Don't concede a goal off the back of a counter-attack that starts from your own set piece. I think that is really frustrating, but Donny do attack very well at speed. They had a few more chances at 1-1 Doncaster, but frankly, so did Crewe. They had a good chance from a long throw. So 1-1 draw, I think it's a great result for Crewe to get a point at Donny. Let's do some League 2 state of play action before we say goodbye in this megapod. I think we've got to start with the fact, George, that in League 2, God, I love quirks. In League 2, there's one team hitting the mythical 2 points per game points tally, and they're 10th in the table. Riddle me that. Work that out. It's AFC Wimbledon, and they haven't played many games.
So they're top of the PPG table?
Top of the PPG table.
Class.
This division is always pretty dense, pretty tight, summed up currently by the fact there's 7 points between 1st and 13th. If you enjoy competitive leagues, if you don't care, and unfortunately we do care, about being able to predict what's going to happen in any given match or in any given weekend, and you just want to strap in for a wild ride, then there's nothing quite like League 2. The top of the table has Vale Doncaster on 21 and 20. Then 4 teams on 19 points. Notts, Walsall, Gillingham and Barrow. Walsall haven't played a game less than all of the above. Bradford and Grimsby are on 18. Crewe on 17. Then Wimbledon on 16, having played only 8 games. Fleetwood on 16, having played only 9 games. Chesterfield and Newport on 15 with 11 games having been played. Try and make sense of that. Tell me some stances. Tell me some teams you enjoy watching. Tell me whatever you like.
It's hard to. I think the team that I'm pleasantly surprised by have to be Walsall. Like I did not. We had a season's worth of Matt Sadler last year to try and see any signs that this was coming, and I didn't really see it. There were periods towards the back end of the campaign where we saw how strong they were defensively, and they looked like they were going to make a run into the top 7, and then it kind of unravelled pretty alarmingly.
They had such strong underlying numbers at the back end of last season, and we managed to talk ourselves out of like them
really
being
going
legit.
for it. Well, it just felt like, you look at the transfer business now, and like certainly the addition of Nathan Lowe looks like a masterstroke. Lake in the midfield as well. Like it's very quickly, and Barrett, who we've spoken about a few times, I don't think is for League 2 for long. So the recruitment has been really impressive at a level that kind of went above my head. They've been so impressive in the way that they have managed to be such a good, so quickly combining a really strong defensive unit with a good attacking output. Now we record this off the back of two pretty alarming, well, one alarming result with a 6-2 defeat when hosting Fleetwood, but they backed that up with a really good performance at Chesterfield next time out, where they drew 2-2, but they were the better side in the game. It was back to what we're used to with them, where Chesterfield, such a good attacking side, didn't create too much. Walsall creating by far the better chances. I'm happy to basically draw a line through the Fleetwood result, and we'll get on to Fleetwood in a second. I think Walsall have been, certainly to my mind, the surprise package, and Matt Sadler, the surprise manager of the season so far.
Yeah, I think they are my pick for favourite team to watch, because there's something about, and with the exception of that game against Fleetwood, of course, there's something about the suffocating nature of their out-of-possession style and the quite fun nature of their attacking play and the varied ways that they've created chances from open play, but also from set-piece situations, that I think have made Walsall a really good watch this season. I also like watching Chesterfield. I just think they have an inherently attacking mindset that I think is really nice, and I enjoy watching that. Summed up by the fact that they started against Notts with Liam Mandeville playing at right back. It is a role he played a bit at National League level, but that's still pretty funky when you've also got 4 attacking players in your 4-2-3-1. They are struggling to keep clean sheets. They haven't kept a single one at home. So their games are just pretty entertaining. And then Donny as well, there's something about the way that they attack it at pace in transition, getting so much out of their quality wide players, Molineux and Gibson. I think they're really exciting to watch. They're also my strongest stance.
Ooh.
I think hardest thing to predict, apart from basically everything at this point, is who wins the title. I would not have a strong stance on who wins the title. But if I had to pick a team to finish in the top 3 and throw my whole life behind it, I think it is Donny at the moment. And I think it's because they've got all the ingredients. They're not that solid defensively, so maybe they don't have all the ingredients. But there's something about the way that they play. There's definitely something about the fact that it's Grant McCann in charge, who I think has an excellent temperament to manage this sort of team, who we know can keep good things going throughout a campaign and win promotion, as he has done previously before. They have really good players. They've actually suffered quite a lot of injuries, particularly at the back so far this season, and it hasn't impacted them in terms of the points that they've picked up so far, 20 in 11 games. We know from last season that they can put together incredible runs. I don't expect them to win 10 or 11 games in a row at any point, but we know that they have that in them, and there's still question marks in terms of that stuff around the other teams, which isn't to put any of the other teams down, but I just feel most sure, I think, about Doncaster in terms of an automatic promotion team. What about you? Strong stances?
Charlie Adam.
Yeah, yes. He has a strong stance.
He stances the ball very hard.
Yeah.
I think Charlie Adam is really good.
A really good manager.
Yes, rather than really good at corners like Sir Alex Ferguson 20 years ago. I think there's enough evidence now at the back end of last season at Fleetwood and this season where he has really got to grips with a group of players. He has formed them into a side they remind me a bit of Stockport from last season, where it's just relentless, high quality chance creation. They are, like, every week you watch them and you see the goals that they score and they feel repeatable. They don't feel like lucky or fluky. And their defensive unit is pretty good. He's getting the best out of players such as Danny Mayer, who we know at this level when he's at his best can be phenomenal. They are, you talk there about AFC Wimbledon's, having games in hand. Fleetwood aren't far behind their PPG, so their league position right now is a bit of a myth. They're down in 11th, but actually because they've only played 9 games, they're much higher than that. So he's someone to look out for. It kind of reminds me a bit of Mike Duff at Cheltenham, where the early signs were there to suggest to me that, I don't think Charlie Adam will be a League 2 manager. I think he's got a future ahead of him, which I probably didn't expect to say when he was appointed manager at Fleetwood under a year ago. Yeah,
he's getting a lot out of Brendan Sarpong-Wiredu, as he did last season in League One, but Elliot Bonds as well has stepped in nicely in midfield. And then it's that top 2 of Graydon and Coughlin that have just been so fun, that seem to complement each other so well. Between the two of them, you really do have, basically all bases covered when it comes to goal scoring, running the channels, banging with centre-backs in terms of the physical battle. So they are my pleasantly surprised team, Fleetwood, because, as you know, I was pretty concerned about them, and I couldn't see the wood for the trees.
Happens to all of us.
The Fleetwood for the trees. I think another hardest to predict is who goes down.
Yeah, that's mine.
It just feels like there's loads still to come. The bottom half of the table, George, is Newport on 15, Harrogate on 14, MK Dons and Salford on 12, Colne, Swindon, Tranmere on 11, Bromley and Cheltenham on 10, Accrington 9, and then Morecambe and Carlisle, the bottom 2, on 7. Why is it so hard to predict?
Well, I think for the reasons we mentioned, I think Morecambe and Accrington, there's a possibility that if we recorded this podcast 2 weeks ago and it was who's the easiest to predict, would have been like probably relegation in League 2. Just kind of feels like they're 2 bad teams. Whereas now, quite the opposite. It also is a bit of a strange one where teams that I think will be down there, such as Newport and Harrogate, have like fairly good points tallies to this stage, because you're having to predict on quite a substantial turnaround of form from a negative perspective on them. The 2 relegation spots make it difficult too. Cheltenham aside, who got relegated from League 1 last season, there are going to be differing views as to quite how bad they are. It feels like in League 2 there are probably 10 teams at this stage that could fit into those 2 relegation spots, and it's pretty hard to work out who it'll be. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm pretty worried about Cheltenham's level of performance and the atmosphere around the club. I mean, I'm underwhelmed by Salford City, and at the moment they're looking all right in 16th, but
the way that I see their performances, and the way that I think it. We know that they are volatile in terms of how they perceive managerial performance and how quickly they might end things. I'm also pretty sure that Salford City's ownership are going to be really keen to stop perpetuating that, because I don't think they like that reputation. But with Carl Robinson, you have a manager who has done some excellent jobs and had some excellent seasons, but has also, when things have been not great, his teams have unravelled pretty spectacularly. And they're also just not what I expected. They're terrible going forward. There's such a lack of cohesion at the top end of the pitch. The majority of their 7 goals in 10 games, which is a bleak output, have been like bits of individual quality, Elek in the main. And they're surprisingly good defensively for a Carl Robinson team, which I normally think as being the other way around in terms of, strong going forward and a bit more open at the back. So I'm underwhelmed by them massively. And yeah, that's all I have to say on the matter. You're underwhelmed by
MK Dons, obviously, who've just been really poor this season. Haven't really recovered from the disappointment of last season's playoff fiasco. Were poor under Mike Williamson, have appointed Scott Lindsay, were toothless at home to Port Vale last time out. Right now they look really poor. A side that were pre-season were one of the title favourites, not playing particularly exciting football, despite looking to have recruited a pretty strong group of players in the summer. So I'm not entirely sure what's going wrong there, just that it is going wrong.
One thing before we finish is just to say this feels like a much more normal League Two. It went a little bit nutty last year, and the 3 teams that went up contributed in the main to that in Stockport, Mansfield and Wrexham. One way of looking at this was shared by Tim Hansen, who runs the blog Plough Lane by Numbers, and he's looked at the average number of goals scored by teams finishing in the top 3, so automatic promotion teams in League Two over the last 12 seasons. Generally, the average number of goals scored by teams finishing in the top 3 is between 61 goals, which feels very low in a 46-game season, and 83 goals. That's kind of the range over 11 seasons worth. And then last season, those 3 teams averaged 91.7 goals. It doesn't look to me like this season is going to be won by the team that completely outscore everyone. I think it is going to be a little more normal, and the teams that have a bit more balance and consistency and are able to keep the score down in terms of 0s and 1s, but also have a consistent goal threat, it's going to be a little more normal in terms of the teams that we see going up automatically. It'd be good to hear from you guys. Let us know what you think about any of the above, Championship, League 1, League 2, and we really hope you've enjoyed the State of the Nation podcast. We'll be back again on Thursday with a betting show, but before then, on Wednesday, the England pod returns. Thanks, and go well.